All right. Well, thank you, everybody, coming again and to give me opportunity to talk about this. Thank you, Tom. And today I'm going to talk about this particular paper to introduce you a couple of concepts that I think would be potentially interesting to you guys. So the motivations of today's talk is that I had a chat and also longish interview with Tom, and this is the QR code for that YouTube thing that I uploaded or made it available today. And during that conversation, it's a kind of redoing of the same kind of conversation I had with Tom over the lunch, which we kind of both agree that may be useful for you guys to also chip in, because the part of the talk or discussion was about this kind of question: where does the meaning of an object come from? Like when you see something like this, you see it and then understand that this is form. And it's so obvious that it's usually not thought as a kind of proper question, but it has been lots of kind of answers and also thoughts put into, and maybe. Except for Tom, do you guys have thought about this or have any kind of answers from different kind of tradition? Like, where does the meaning come from?
Like triangle.
Triangle. Like a purse. Yeah, that's one of the relatively popular kind of ideas. Yeah, so that's one kind of idea. Semantics is a big issue, and then so related thing is that what is the nature of the relationship between the structure of consciousness that we talked, or qualia, and the structure of the word. If it's completely arbitrary, that somebody many linguists also point out that the particular word like red doesn't have to correspond to this experience, right? So there is some kind of arbitrariness in terms of the mapping, but somehow it's kind of grounded and intersubjectively shared. And where does it come from? That's the question. And do you have any kind of guess about where does this come from?
Like from the language, like semiotics, like how people use the language, how people use the words and the context of other words.
I see. So one possibility is this kind of relationship is kind of fixed through the effect of the language, and the language itself has a kind of structure. That's one possible kind of ideas. Yes. Any other ideas or thoughts?
Whichever helps you achieve your goals.
I see. So from behavior or kind of the working. Yeah, that's also that's more kind of individually kind of based kind of idea, right? And that may be able to explain the meaning in animals as well. Any other thoughts or opinions?
There's the sensory motor contingency hypothesis.
Right. So whatever you see, and after that, you do kind of conditions and cycles to make it kind of one pattern to make it something meaningful.
Some form of resonance, like the representation is a form of compressed information about outside world or something like this.
I see. So that's actually now becoming kind of relevant to what I'm going to present today. So that it's a resonance between what you experience and what's over there, sort of, right? Okay, that's probably good enough. But if you have any other opinions, and then so this has been a lot discussed.
Sorry, now
yeah.
One thing. Would you say that this question maps under the question of the relationship between primary and secondary qualities?
Primary quality is this qualia sensory experience, and then
sorry, reverse. So primary would be the world, I guess, like extension, and things that are objective, and then the secondary qualities would be like the qualia, I guess.
I see. So you think that's the sort of?
Well, I'm just saying that's a classical question in philosophy. There are some properties which seem to be subject dependent and some which seem to be world dependent.
Right.
And that's it's a long discussion about how the two things are related to each other. And
right. So okay, so that's sort of the kind of view where the world has a kind of structure first, before we are getting into the Disney world, and then we kind of learn this kind of structure. That's the view, sort of, right? The primary structure is out there.
Exactly.
And the secondary
It's with it. Yeah, we project it.
structure is
Exactly.
the sort of represent or
Exactly.
incorporate the structure, right? Okay. So I'll come to that. And then this is also related this famous program. Have you heard of this thing, a symbol grounding program? And it's an famous program in AI and cognitive science and the philosophy of mind and semantics. And it boils down to the several questions: how symbols acquire meaning in a way that is tied to the physical world, although symbol itself is a kind of arbitrary, right, with respect to the meaning. Red can mean this, but aka can mean also this, and something else also can mean this, snai or something like that in the Russian. And then also the problem of what meaning itself really is. Then, if you start to think about this arbitrariness, what the meaning is becomes very unclear. You get confused. And then the problem of how it is that mental states or consciousness are meaningful. In this meaning, in this term, meaningful itself is also very difficult kind of word without really knowing what the meaning is. But it's full of that. But then eventually the problem of consciousness, what is the connection between certain physical systems, including our environment and the contents of subjective experience. So this is just first paragraph of the wiki entry, but this is pretty much what we are going to talk about today. So overall goals of today's discussion is that I'm going to introduce briefly this paper. And this paper's main kind of conclusion is the meaning is the feeling. And the feeling means experience that things has. And then re-examining several philosophical psychological concepts through the lens of the IIT. And then I found this is kind of very clear in the end that through this lens of the IIT, so once the definition of the sensation, perception, and the representation becomes very clear, at least to me. But if you read some, Wikipedia or psychology literature, these things are not super clear, right? Probably. I don't know what you think about it. And then how the brains, I'm going to talk about two systems, B1 brain and B2 brain. It's a model system. And how it's called effect structure. According to IIT, it means that the structure of consciousness can incorporate sort of the mirror a causal structure of the environment type 1, E2, E1, and E2. And then introduce this concept of matching, which is different from sort of the optimization or sort of representation of the world that you probably have heard of before. So to understand this, it's probably important to have two cases where you have a same brain activity, but do not generate the same meaning to the different people. And it could be the case where, somebody brought up in two different cultures, seeing the same thing, but a different meaning, right? Another thing is that the relationship between the experience during dreaming and the wake, how IIT gives an explanation about that. And then also relationship between intrinsic meaning, because IIT's view is that meaning is all what you are experiencing. It's intrinsic, only you have that. And how it relates to external stimuli. And then how the causal processes in the environment, these three things can be kind of related. That's the sort of the schematic that the IIT provides. So far, is it fine? Okay. And then a very brief recap of the IIT. And I don't have time, or I don't think it's gonna be super interesting to you guys at this stage to learn IIT per se. But this is a one page from the so-called IIT wiki, and it's a very nice web page that I wanted to kind of introduce today. If you go to just type IIT wiki, then you can go to this kind of website, IIT wiki, and then there is a easy explanation of IIT from very much introduction to the sort of latest kind of development. And then one of the slideshow contains this type of the almost like a introductory explanation of IIT. And the quick thing is that the first IIT starts from introspection to try to capture or characterize what is the essential property of the consciousness, and then based on that try to formulate mathematical kind of properties of the basis of the things that can support these 5 properties of the consciousness, and then try to establish this explanatory identity. So experience and phi structure is identical explanatory wise. That's the IIT's view. And then again, to introspect about the different types of the experience, like a space, time, and those objects and color. And then each of them has a different kind of property. And then you do this formulation and the file structure kind of group again. This is sort of a core part of the IIT development. And then experimentally, people have been doing this kind of validation, which I'm not going to talk about, but I think I'm going to upload some aspects of this testing of the effort in Tani-san's lab. I gave like 2-3 weeks ago, again on YouTube, and then eventually to extrapolate what we can say about like artificial consciousness and things like that. And today's discussion about evolution or sort of development, learning, culture effects is more to do with this level, the extrapolation of what we can say about IIT based on IIT. So it's not gonna, I'm not gonna talk about whether IIT is gonna be correct or not in this talk. Okay, so this last part in a sense. And so this is a central toy model that I'm gonna explain today. So this, just to understand, this understanding is quite important. So what this figure means is that the left side is sort of the external input. Well, you can consider this as a retina, eye, okay? And then it's fine, sorry. Should I turn on my audio? Because there is some kind of warning came.
I made your video spotlight because you
okay. All right, that's fine. All right, so anyway, so the yellow is on and the white is off. That's the input pattern to the eye, okay? Then this A to H is sort of the brains, you can consider it as like a B1, population of B1 neurons, which locally only affects or gets affected by this. And this, right now I'm talking about considering the situation where the brain is in a dreaming state. So regardless of this input pattern, it doesn't receive anything. And that it happens to be the case that all the A to H detector is the state of off. All of them are off right now, okay? And then the intermediate part, this IJKL, is the kind of pattern detector. And then M is the OR gate-like thing, so that if IJKL, one of them is active, then M becomes active. And then M gives a feedback into the initial layer of the B1 neurons. That's a sort of the idea, okay? And then just to go a little bit more into the detail, so that I'm now going to talk about a particular detector, pattern detector J here, okay? This J receives the input from B, C, D, E, F, this 5 thing, okay? And then if it detects a pattern like 01110 or 01100 or 00110, then this guy becomes active. So basically it is trying to detect a 2 consecutive kind of thing or 3 consecutive thing. Line detector, segment detector. And this is the same for I, J, K, L. And each of them is going to look at a different part of the visual field, and then as long as there is a line, it becomes active. Okay? It's like a B2 or B1 complex cell-like kind of idea. And then it also has its self-activity and then feedback. So the basic idea of the IIT is that how to characterize this J thing here, which is currently off. What does it mean? From this this guy's intrinsic perspective. Where does it come from and where it's going? It's probably a difficult kind of thing to think about it. But if it's totally fine for you to be completely wrong. But what do you think that what it means for the J to be off right now about its one step back, about its connection?
There was no line.
Yes, that's correct, totally correct. So because this 5 input line is not this none of these 3 components, right? That's why it is 0. So it means that it's one of 2 to the 5 patterns, which is not consistent with this input pattern. There was no line one step before, and also its self-inhibition is very strong. So the previous one was also probably not active. And also it's coming from the top, but it's coming only like 0.5. So in the end, what it means that most likely scenario is that it itself was 0 in one step before, because the input pattern has lots of possibility. And any one of them could actually be like that, right? So it doesn't actually determine the previous step. But if the last one was 0, then it's very likely that this is going to be 0 next time. So it determines its own state in terms of off state. If it's an on state, it's a different story, but that's one of the things. And then also what it means that if this guy is 0, then what does it mean for the next future? Can you think about it? Its output is going to be J itself and also M as well. And this strength is like strong, but this one can become active when one of them is active.
So it probably stay 0 too.
Which one?
J will stay 0 if there will have no input.
Exactly. So that's the kind of the idea.
And there is like some random number generator after it.
Yeah. So that's a sort of technical kind of thing. So you don't need to worry about it. But so this is sort of the essential kind of the procedure of IoT. When you try to think about the J, its cause is J being off in one step before, and its future effect is also J being 0. So this is called sort of the concept for our distinction for this thing. And then IoT's procedure, when you try to apply it for one first order mechanism as well as the second order mechanism, combination BC and BCI and things like that, they all generate this type of the non-reducible kind of a cause effect structure that I talked about like 2-3 weeks ago here. So I'll skip. And then something similar can be also talked about this joint mechanism BCD. So the BCD as a whole to be 0 means, in this case, it turns out that the C itself is 0 is the most likely cause of this, because B and D is being boundary. It can have an effect from A and also B. So it's less sort of deterministic, but the BCD being off as a whole requires C to be off. And then the future wise, because 3 of them are all off, it means that the J also is very likely to be off, right? And also BCD themselves also becomes 0 again. So BCDJ as a sort of compound effect becomes this guy's sort of effect, most likely effect. So if you compute something like this for each of all these things, and it's a really gigantically complex kind of structure, but you can compute it, and then as in the end, what you get is something like irreducible mechanism plus irreducible cause and irreducible effects, which are all connected through the causal relations. And so far, it's a bit complicated, but you don't have to understand this or to get this story today, if you accept this. But so far, is it all right? More or less. And then if you do this kind of analysis, then what turns out is that when the external input to this, visual brain, like, V1 plus line detector plus invariance detector, this itself is like a sleeping brain, and then generates this phi structure, and then that corresponds to dreaming. Okay, and then when IIT considers perceiving, what it means is that it is connected through to the external world through this kind of boundary condition. All the stimulus sensory input determines the state of the BCD and the GH to be now on. But if all of this state is the same between regardless of the input, then IIT predicts that experience itself should be the same. So in other words, in sort of neuroscientific kind of world, if the V1 to let's say V4 is really critical for consciousness, and all of them becomes in one state, then it doesn't matter whether you are seeing it through the eye in a wake state or under the dream. It is the same kind of experience. That's their kind of idea.
This is the kind of point that we were debating during our conversation, whether being neurocentric about this, is necessary or not. Because in a way, what you're showing is that if we can give a mathematical structural analysis of qualia space, which you nicely did with your large samples and so on, and showing that they share a lot of the structure across cultures, developmental stages, and all that. One argument to make is that similar to mathematics, it might actually be to no end subject independent. And this is going back to the question I had about primary and secondary qualities. So normally, primary qualities are the ones that can be given a mathematical treatment, and then we assume that they are part of the world, not part of the subject. So even if there were no subjects, they would still be true in a way. They would still be the case. But for qualia, it's different. It's hard to give them a mathematical treatment, and people usually think that they're subjective and subject dependent. But what you're doing here is showing that actually the secondary qualities also can be given, in a sense, a mathematical treatment.
Right.
But that opens more doors than just saying that, they're just generated inside your brain. It could, for example, also indicate that maybe they're also properties of the world in a sense, just like the primary qualities also are.
Okay, maybe I can get to that by going to the example a little bit further, but I think I take your point.
Is it just that?
But here, this is at least this so far, this is a sort of IIT hypothesis, and there are some kind of evidence to suggest, but it's not super strong in the sense of that you can induce exactly the same kind of brain state with and without under the dream or under the wake. We don't have that kind of technology right now. But the prediction is that if we can do that within the subject, you can't just discriminate whether you are in the dream or not.
I completely understand that, right? So that's the kind of the argument from is it illusion? Argument from illusion, which is to say that once you're accepting an internalist hypothesis or representations hypothesis, then basically there could be a situation where it's impossible for you to distinguish being in a hallucination or in a perceptual situation, or in this case, dreaming and perceiving.
Right.
But that's, this is a separate discussion, but there are some, is that the kind of position that we want to defend? What are the motivation for trying to make an equivalence argument between hallucination and perception?
I would say it's basically based on the empirical observation so far.
Yeah,
empirical observation of the dreaming and the neural activity seems to be pointing to this kind of direction.
Well, two things, right? You said that it's hard for us to actually do the experiment.
Not exact, exact kind of complicated, that's not possible yet. I understand that.
And also in terms of the richness and so on, right? So we want to say something about that perception allows us to make contact with the world, right? So basically, if you're saying that there is in principle no difference between dreaming and perceiving, then you have to make some additional arguments for why we are justified.
Yeah, so
that there's a world in the
that kind of argument and evidence comes from this state. is validation state.
Mhm.
I'm not going to talk about that for today. So that's a separate issue. Today, I'm going to talk about something like, if this, framework is right in the, more or less the same, correct way, then what it can actually hold. So that's a bit separate.
Okay, sure.
So integrated information is higher for dreaming states, like.
So that's a bit
Like-
confusing. It's because this is a case when everything is off, then that's this value. And then, so I think you're right that they should have some kind of, figure where, this is also based on all of off kind of state. And then that should actually give the exactly same number. I mean, exactly same state.
And because like if integrated information is higher for dreaming state, it actually makes some sense in sense that when you're dreaming, you kind of recursively looped on itself, and when you actually perceiving the world, you need to make like space from information from outside to enter the brain, your mind, and then there should be like some space for that information. So information should be like less integrated internally to allow some information from outside. If it makes
Yeah.
sense.
So yeah, to some
Kind
extent,
of
correct.
assumption.
But it's also a little bit complicated as well. The reason is, and also that's also now I remember that that's the reason why they don't probably put this figure with everything off and also input of on. The reason is that if the input is off, it's actually explicitly saying to the B1 neurons that this is off,
Yeah, yes.
right? And that's actually different from this
Yes,
situation.
yes.
So you're right, and then maybe the five in the end, maybe dream goes down or up, but it's also case by case. It's really complicated actually. This is called a fixed sort of background condition. And this is a background condition is actually off. So yeah, in that sense, yeah, waking experience and dreaming experience may not be completely identical in the end. Yeah, that's a good point. And I might have said something wrong in response to Tom's criticism actually. Anyway, so do I fine with it so far? Okay, then this starts to be kind of interesting for our discussion today about meaning and so on. So here I'm going to talk about the situation where there are two systems with different internal structures. And then given the exactly same stimulus, but then the different activity pattern starts to give the different meaning. So situation here is that here, that's what I explained to you just 5 minutes ago, right? This IJKL detects either 01110 or 01100 or 00110. It's a line detector. Okay, this one IJKL is different. What it means is that each of them either receives do you have a pen or if I don't have
This is examining.
Hmm?
This
It doesn't work?
carbon marker.
Oh, it's not a marker?
It's permanent.
It's permanent?
Yes, here.
Yeah, be careful with that one.
Oh, okay.
So no markers?
then I'll just say that. So here, this is a sort of a center auto detector. It becomes active only 01110 or 00100. So basically, there must be like central thing active, and then edge becomes inactive. So if you think about the up to here, A, B, C, D, F, G, H, it's identical, right? Because the retina and also B1 is the same. But this one doesn't detect the line because it's only one here. And then this one detects, oh, okay, so there's a pattern of center of.
It's like different convolutional neural networks.
Exactly. So this one becomes active, and then this one also becomes active. Oh, okay, there is a dot, right? Then, because the activity pattern is different, so you can also imagine that that eye structure becomes also different, and then also now they start to introduce this concept called a perceptual structure, and a perceptual structure. Thank you. It is an idea where how much of this phi structure is uniquely determined or triggered by the stimulus.
No, maybe I missed something. So
Right.
where do they draw the boundary to create this network of nodes that are influencing the causal structure? So like the A, all the A, B, C, D, and so on. You know, it's within a bounded region. You know, there's like shaded blue or gray or whatever it is. What determines that boundary? Why not zoom out and say, you know, the retinal cells also are involved? And if it's the retinal cells, why not also go one step further out into the world and things like that?
So that comes into the sort of IIT sort of the basic assumption or basic theory part, where the retina produces a feed-forward input into the B1 neurons.
It's true, but we already mentioned sensory motor loops, right? So it's not complete.
Wait. But then when there's a feed-forward connections, then IIT introduces the idea so-called integration. And if you cut this unidirectionally, especially in this backward direction, it doesn't make any difference. If you disconnect into this direction, it does make a difference because you actually have an inference and you ignore that. But what I'm talking about is that there is no way for this to affect on this side.
But that's not true, right?
I mean, at least we don't consider any kind of a movement or whatever right now. Therefore, we don't have any way to influence on this side right now for this system.
I understand that's your assumption. I guess what I'm just highlighting is that another possible extension of the same framework would be to say, in practice, there's always continuous influence in both directions.
Right.
And the framework would say that even if it's on the periphery, it changes the overall structure. Therefore, it would be slightly different in terms of its quality space compared to, maybe not completely, because most of it might be the same.
Right.
But the fact that now part of the network actually extends into the world through the sensory motor loop means that maybe at the periphery of the structure, things are slightly different compared to if they don't go through the world.
Right. So that's all discussion about sort of the mechanism of IIT kind of discussion part. And so I also have some kind of issues with that, but what basically it says is that if you do this analysis, then you can identify that this tightly connected kind of network, subnetwork, is much more sort of, in a sense, coherent and determines its next step, and so its influence from the past most maximally as a coherent unit. You just can't reduce it. But this can be actually reduced. So, and also we are now thinking about the time step of one step before and one step next. So even if there isn't a kind of motor part here, if it's also feed forward, this state can affect on that, but this cannot affect on this. If that's the case, then this is also out. And then this and this can make a difference in terms of coupling, as you say, right? But this kind of coupling is actually much more complicated, and also it will have a loop, external loop, and then that can be also kind of causally disconnected as well. And this causal disconnection is the one thing that we discussed also 2-3 weeks ago, where like a Julia Powell's formalism, if you directly perturb this each, can you actually fix it on its own? And in that sense, external periphery can be, manipulated, causally manipulated without changing experience and so on. And that's the sort of the, criteria for IIT to come up with this as a whole system, but what matters is only the subset.
Okay.
All right. So then now coming back to what this conceptual structure issue. So this itself is the whole of the experience according to IIT, and then part of it is uniquely determined by the input pattern structure here. That 0, 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, 0. This is activating some particular pattern and a particular cause effect distinction, and that's dotted by black thing here and here. So in a sense, IIT's idea is that the sensation is sort of the thing that is determined by this input layer. It's a kind of a structure of the input reflecting the world. And then the perception is a sort of a pattern of the higher level kind of thing, which interprets the word, okay, there's a dot here, and there's no line here. That's a sort of perception. And then the representation part is that when this guy interprets this thing, there's a dot somewhere, is actually reflecting the structure of the word. That's sort of the corresponding kind of representation. In fact, this is now a system is looking at this word, and it happened to be that there's a pointer generator is there and nothing else, and it is correctly recognizing, okay, there was a point. But here, because it has no concept like that, in a different way, different way of speaking. You don't speak a language of, let's say, math, right? And then seeing that in sign of delta, you don't understand anything. And then that's like this situation. I don't see anything meaningful. But if you're a mathematician, that's a delta, and that's a differentiation, blah, blah, blah. That's meaningful to you. So that's the difference between these two systems. So different brain, same stimulus, different meaning. That's what it is. And then this perceptual richness index, I don't talk about, can be also changed out, computed according to this framework. But then the even more interesting thing, I think, is this same stimulus, same activation pattern, and then different meaning. And that's becoming sort of concern about a brain-centric view in a very, very simple way. But the difference between these two things is that, as I said, right, this I's meaning is that 0, 1, 1, 1, 0 is a detection of something like a center, dot-like structure there, right? This or 0, 0, 1, 0, 0, that's what it means. And here for this guy, this means that it's 0, 1, 1, 0, 0, there's a line, or 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, there's a line, or 0, 1, 1, 1, 0. That's another line. So for this guy, it means that there was a line. But I don't, activation pattern was exactly the same, right? And usually, neuroscience ends here. Mathematician's brain and my brain look at the neurophysiology fMRI, and the pattern looks same. Okay, that's the end, right? But what IIT is going a little bit further is that no, you actually need to understand what this JKL is not firing. What does it mean? So this means that there was no line in other place. This one is no dots over there, right? And that starts to discriminate between the meaning of this guy's on and this guy's on. And so if this is on and off, then that's a slightly different structure. And as a result, this and this is different. And then also perceptual structure itself is also different. And so to spell it out, two systems with different internal structures, when there is something like that kind of situation, the same stimulus can give rise to exactly the same activity patterns, but different meanings.
So it's like we have like two computers which like hardware is identical, and like for that particular stimulus, like input is identical and output is identical, but like the context was different because they have different programs inside.
Exactly. Makes sense, right? Yeah, but if you just record the activity pattern of the two computers, it may look identical. But one may be just computing something like math and something like art.
Yeah, I totally don't understand this. What? How does it supposed to work?
The hardware is identical, but for some particular like specifically constructed pattern, for some special case, the input is the same and the output is the same, but the meaning of the computations was different because software was different. Like that case is true for some particular inputs, for a specific constructed input.
How often does it happen?
Yeah, how could that even happen?
I mean, it's artificially constructed.
It's artificially constructed, but is there a merit to it? I mean, does it really happen that you
Yeah,
have
so-
a situation like that where you have two different minds and
Yeah.
their activity is exactly the same?
Well, maybe the idea is that when like people record brain, we don't have access to the connections. We only see like the neurons.
But in this case, we're assuming that all the connections are the same,
And
right?
if
That's
this
No,
is-
no, connections are different.
But it's
No, wait,
construction
Yeah,
the same.
connection is the same, but what's different?
Logic is different.
This logic is different.
Yeah.
The rule is different. In a sense that these neurons connection is exactly the same, but how it actually becomes active is different.
Right, but this is what is the biological, let's say, background to this? Is it something that happens in neuroscience?
I think
Because
this happens
is
a lot.
where the neuroscience stops, but we cannot really say that the logic. I'm just, the wiring is not the same.
Motivation is because when people measure the brain, they can only report activity part.
Exactly.
We cannot record the
Exactly.
of the brain.
You're right.
Okay.
But at the course level, like let's say functional connectivity or something like that, you can actually consider to be like a proxy of the connectivity, right? And then you equate this connectivity pattern between the two groups.
Can we do that? There's so many connections. So it's very probably, even if you take twins, they will have different connections.
Yeah.
So I'm just just a little bit of skepticism. That's what I'm saying. But I understand the computational idea there.
But okay, so I don't think this is actually really the super upshot of this kind of paper. But what I wanted to say is that activity pattern itself, just recording it, doesn't really mean that what it's actually experiencing, and its unfolded conscious experience is more important. And that the difference comes from a causation. Actually, causation is different in IJKL in these two things. Okay. Then also starts to also
informational trigger is different.
The trigger,
right. So this like
this could have been triggered by DC on as well. Could have.
Yeah. So this is like a Seng's criterial causation in that way, right? So
counterfactual.
Yeah. So depending on what kind of criteria set off a neuron firing, that will change the causal flow, right. But the pattern could look the same at a particular moment in time.
Right.
Okay.
I mean, in practice, I think there can be something like, let's say, bilingual versus monolingual. Situation could be kind of similar potentially. I may have some kind of English version and Japanese version of the concept of red detector in the side of the brain, right? And for me, aka can also activate that, and the red definitely activate that. But it doesn't mean that you guys also same neuronal structure become active is exactly the same, because you guys, some of you guys may have aka like you, but some of you guys do not, and the other different kind of concept also activates that. So meaning of the same detector is potentially different for each person.
So that means that meaning is context dependent.
Exactly, context or intrinsic connectivity. How it's actually interpreting this activity pattern. That's the upshot of this paper. Yeah, you pretty much got it actually. And then now this part is also, then this also speaks to a part of the question or conclusion that Tom gave in a sense. So here, it's different environment, okay? 3 different environments, but it gives exactly same activity for the same brain. Now this is a line segment brain, and the exactly same structure, phi structure, and also exactly same pattern. That's all the positive richness. Despite the fact that you are in, let's say, seeing the TV noise, nothing, but it just happened to kind of generate some kind of flash of the human face-like thing, and then you start to see face. And then this one is a case where it's just like non-real, again TV, but it is a meaningful kind of TV. And then you see some particular faint, shot of the face, right? And the experience between this and this is the same. And then this one is a real 3D interaction, and you see a face, but in again, faint situation, like under the fog or something like that. Experience is exactly the same, and this is in a sense meaningful, right? Because of that, it's from a real environment. This is kind of virtual, and then this is complete noise, but the experience is the same. And this one can be actually distinguished from this if you have a capability to move, right? Move outside of the TV screen, then you can understand what I see is a virtual reality. It's not a real. So in that sense, this is much more kind of poor situation, but experience-wise, it's the same. And many illusion is what works like this, right? You know, do you know the hollow face illusion? Even if you know that this is just like not a face and then it's going protruding in this way, if you start to see that, you know, when it's coming here, it starts to look that and protruding this way.
I think this is like an interesting point for your own data interpretation. And going back to this conversation that we've been having about how to interpret the constancy of the quality structure that you're uncovering in your you know, like large scale you know, relational measurements. I think the nice thing is that it opens up the possibility that the invariant that you're uncovering is an invariant that is so stable because it loops through the environment. And so although you have, let's say, young people, people with different upbringing, different backgrounds, there's so much variability. And if you were to look inside their brain, probably you'll find a lot of variability too. It's very unlikely that they will have the same causal structural network instantiated in their brains. But, you know, the sensor motor invariants might be quite similar for them, in the sense that, as you just said, you know, if I move something to the side, I will uninclude something. You know, if I move something in front, it will include it. And that will be the same for everybody, no matter what, in a way, right? And so that's a nice argument to actually then bring in and say, you know, maybe what we can do here with this framework is that it's not necessary that we did restrict the network to only these nodes. You know, we can consider that these nodes also loop through the environment when people are perceiving things. And that adds a certain kind of invariance to the structure that might help us explain why it's not so brain dependent.
I mean, brain dependent or not is, let's leave it aside, but, you know, it does actually talk in the discussion of this paper. Actually, it talks about extending this framework of, you know, how much of this is reflecting the cause in the environment, right? And they also talk about extending how much of what you do reflects what you actually experience. And that's how they explain intention and the free will.
And the system does not have like long-term memory, so it's only like remember the current state and maybe something about the immediately past state. So maybe that's the reason why there is no difference between noise and like TV and world, because if you can only access one moment of time, then it makes sense that there is no difference between like static picture, which like randomly appear in like video. But if you have like the direct access to the history, then there's like difference between like this.
Yeah, that's also another good argument, which this paper doesn't explicitly talk about, like memory and so the grain side of the thing, but it's discussed in a different paper. But yeah, role of the memory may also distinguish between this three different kind of environment as well. But momentarily, when it enters into this situation, you can call it as a hallucination, and then this is real. But this is a way to distinguish between the representation versus not, because under this situation, this three-line segment detector becoming on that doesn't happen a real kind of counterpart, because in this world everything is just two segments, and it just happened to overlap, and that's a three segment. But it's actually detecting the false sort of the causation, right? And it's almost like illusion, what people call as illusion. It's not there, but it's brain. It becomes kind of activated in such a way. And then now I'm going to skip this, and then maybe this is a part that probably Tom may be more interested, or I don't know. What we are talking about is kind of related. So what they talk about matching is a difference in terms of the richness of this person generated by different kind of environmental input under the nodes versus under the particular causal structure of the environment. So here, the causal structure of the environment is this bluish thing is all exposed by this segment one. So here, basically, you can imagine this as a sort of the world jungle in Okinawa, right? Many things are just green and leaf-like, and so if you go out and you detect lots of leaf, right? That's how it is. And then this one, this dot thing, is potentially more like a desert-like structure where you see a lot of sand, but you don't see lots of trees. And then if your brain is adapted to the sun, you don't detect much. If you're coming to Okinawa, you're not excited because you don't see the familiar, sun. But this is very, very much like an excited because there are lots of trees, right? And then compared to that, if you will show the TV screen noise, how much there is a difference? That's what IIT's sort of, quantification of the matching or optimization to the environment or meaningfulness of the environment to you. And then you can also imagine that this is a kind of a brain that is adapted to the Japanese and then in the Japanese environment. Every moment is kind of, meaningful. And then here, this is a noise, and then here, this is a kind of Russian speaking kind of, situation. Because you don't pick it up, you don't see, you don't feel like it's the same as noise, right? That's how it catches.
Yeah, but it's relatively strange for that figure. I was confused about it because it compares how different. So color is brain. So we have a segment detector. So on the top we have segment detector which react on the two different signals. And on the bottom we have central odd detector which reacts on two different signals. And then they compare how the difference between how segment detector reacts on the different kind of noise and different kind of inputs. Right. But for me, it makes sense to compare how B1 react on the, if you subtract the first line from the third line, not the third yet.
These two are the response of the dot detector.
Yeah, that's the idea. If you compare how the different brains react to the same signal, because we have the same problem with the stimulus avoidance hypothesis.
Right.
To see how the different brains react on the same signal, and I actually can see that they somehow correlated even here.
Yeah, because the subtraction is just linear here.
Okay.
The difference here is the same.
Okay.
If you subtract this one.
So order does not matter. Okay.
Yeah, but what this kind of situation means that how meaningful for you to go into, let's say, Caribbean island, which you don't speak anything, versus noise. If it's completely meaningless to you, then that's close to zero, right? That's what it kind of capture. And then this is the opposite situation where, if the line detector goes into the dot island, then you don't do much, but dot island is great for the dot, people. So that's a sort of how this, brain can capture the causal structure of the world according to this framework. And then, so that's, so you need to leave, right? Right.
Yeah, maybe just before I leave, one comment on the last slide. Because indeed the notion of is matching a new concept for IIT, or was this introduced with this paper?
No, matching is a thing that the Giulio, Tononi, and the Edelman and so Olaf forms introduced in '94.
Okay, my goodness. Okay.
And then, but I read their paper, but it's constructed by only 8 artificial neurons, and the argument was quite kind of short.
Okay.
It's the 4-page PNS paper.
Okay.
The paper itself I don't understand much, but then Giulio actually wrote about this a couple of times, but it's most clear and also most convincing in this paper, I would say.
Yeah. So I like it from the point of view that if we take from the eruption theory point of view of absorption, which is how does the brain make a difference to our experience, which is what this how meaningful is it, how much does it make a difference to what the meaning for you is. The idea is that it's a kind of transaction. So something causes an effect in your experience. What we measure in the brain is the cause, but we can't directly measure consciousness. So we can't directly measure the effect it has on consciousness. So we're measuring causes, but we can't measure the downstream consequences in that way. And so the way that I envision that is like a counterfactual reduction in variability. Causes that should have made a measurable difference now do not make a measurable difference. And one way of a mechanism, to envision a mechanism that could do that, is something like matching, right? So the more two signals line up with each other, they cancel each other out, and further downstream, you do not have any further effects, right? So in a way, and predictive processing is a similar kind of framework, right? So you've got top-down predictions, and then you have the sensory input, and if they're the same, they cancel each other out. There's no error signal. But that's supposed to be the content of your perceptual experience, right? When they match, and That's nice in a way, because that's exactly the kind of mechanism that we could try to posit for what it would mean for something to disappear in a way from measurement, but not disappear completely, because it does make a difference on the side of meaning and experience and so on. Maybe it's a bit of abstract argument, but that's the kind of idea that absorption in the contrast to eruption is actually a reduction in variability at the level of measurement, because the difference that's being made is at the level of consciousness, which is not something that we can directly measure. And so actually from a point of view of measurement, it looks like there is a kind of reduction in difference making, right? So if the difference is here between the perception and the expectation of the detector and what's happening in the environment matches well, in a way, downstream, it might lead to a reduction in variability.
Right. So you raise a lot of points, but I just replied 2 points, right? And one is that kind of overall message or so takeaway from this kind of measurement or concepts. And this matching, that's one of the reasons why, they stick with this comparison of random noise versus, what you actually experience. And then if this is very much, close to the amount of the high value, right? Which is likely to be the case according to this, formalism.
Mm-hmm.
If that is the case, then as you said, yeah, consciousness is very difficult to, detect or measure. However, if you measure, you can actually measure the matching.
Right. Yes.
And matching is, this one is based on this, this number is based on IIT and it's super difficult to compute, but activity pattern to some extent is like neural activity as a matching, right? Mm-hmm. And you can imagine that my brain is like almost like static when I'm seeing like Russian language, but more active and variable when I'm seeing Japanese. Mm-hmm. If that is the case, matching like concept between the noise versus Japanese and Russian versus noise. Actually, to some extent, I understand the Russian data. This is not going to be zero, but then that can actually quantify or as an proxy of the integrated information. And that's also meaningfully applied to the babies, animals, and many different kinds of things. Mm-hmm. And without knowing what this guy is doing or what this guy's neural activity is tuned to. Mm-hmm. If you generate some kind of rich naturalistic kind of stimulus, mm-hmm. like movie, text, sentence, or kind of audio file, and then how variable, mm-hmm. how meaningfully variable each of the brain responses is over the time, this should make a good estimate of this variability of the contents of consciousness. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, this is meaningful, and what you said is pretty much correct, right? Mm-hmm. Then the second point about the connection with the predictive coding, mm-hmm. or eruption theory, I don't totally understand, but and they also don't talk about it much in terms of the predictive coding. But as I was reading this paper, there are several sentences that feels like it's very kind of similar, like in the end, like to try to quantify intention and try to understand what the free will is, they are now applying the same logic to the motor sound, mm-hmm. right? That sounds like active inference.
Yeah, I completely agree. So yeah. I'm happy to learn about this concept and I will look more into it, because it seems to me that if you have convergent developments of research programs coming up with similar concepts for similar problems, like how does the brain make a difference to what's meaningful for the organism, what's in the content of experience, and they all suddenly talk about resonance, about matching, about absorption, and come at that from totally different research backgrounds and different research programs. Maybe there's a kind of general principle waiting to be extracted here, which gives us like a way of integrating all of these again into some deeper level of understanding of what's going on. Right. And it's nice. I mean, we want that, right? We want that, if we are making contact with, with the truth somehow, or we're approaching it, then, these research programs should converge, ideally, right? So it's nice that we have some concepts that start to match.
Yeah.
But it's
I mean, I understand it. And although Giulio probably tend to not to like that kind of, consequence. But this particular paper does acknowledge that, some of the statement or some of the concept is very similar to like perceptual inference. Our consciousness and perception is inference about the world, or reconstruction of the world. This is totally matching with that, but the exact detail and the exact prediction may be different. Like, as you said, Natasha, I mean, whether we have the situation of exact same kind of an activity with completely different meaning, if we can actually demonstrate that, that's actually very interesting. And maybe like synesthesia, for example, the implicit kind of connection is so weak that maybe DTI or whatever doesn't actually detect it, but definitely they are experiencing something different. And most likely the activity pattern may be also similar locally, at least, right? In that case, what can be the explanation is something like this potentially, like counterfactual, activity pattern over the different kind of stimulus set can characterize these two differences or something like that.
Yeah, we need to find a way to apply it for large language models.
For this?
Yeah, like something like this for large language models. To like make difference between like random text and like meaningful text.
So yeah, you have like
that's actually interesting.
Yeah, it's another example of the same kind of principle at work, that somehow there's a reduction of the prediction error, and ultimately meaningfully similar tokens are have similar representation,
right.
Things like that.
In fact, IIT actually is nice because up to here these are really mathematical. You can extrapolate this, apply to this to any system, including LLM, and make some kind of a meaningful conclusion.
So IIT can say that the LLM have some degree of consciousness.
No, because in this case, I presented this at the Tani-san's lab, a couple of weeks ago, but there is a different reason why, IIT says that the large language model, at least within the current architecture, is likely to be very, very low in terms of consciousness. It's something to do with the feed-forward architecture. And so it can't basically influence on itself in one step or next step. And also it's just, difficult to construct any kind of integrated system. And in a short answer also, engineered system, you really want to make things independent and modular to make it easy to tame and also fix and also change, right? But brains are not constructed to for engineers. It's really complicated, right?
Yeah, but LLMs are also very complicated. So we have an article about like unpredictability in LLMs, and they're like very integrated. So they kind of like try to.
It's changing. They're too big, and noise is starting to affect them and things like that.
I see. So then maybe if you do this kind of matching type experiment.
So the phi is going up basically of large language.
Potentially. With the current architecture, it's very unlikely. That's what I would say.
Okay.
Anyway. Anything else?
So I wanted to ask a question after the previous talk about the qualia structure. Can you do like something similar but about like meaning structure, like compare meanings between different large language models, because they have a different internal architecture, but maybe they can arrive to like some conversions, like structures of meanings between the models. Because we don't want to speak about qualia structure for LLMs, but you can speak something about like the colors. Like you compare the like perception of colors between different peoples, and after the comparison with LLM. But what if you like compare different LLMs? How do they like converge to the similar like meaning structure about the color space or stuff like this? And so the next step up after the activation function.
That sounds like a more general question. Is there maybe before we go into that, is there any more questions about this talk? No. So then let's thank our speaker. Thank you very much.
Yeah, like if we can move to like meaning structure, like as the next step, so we extract somehow because we're not really interested like in the activated, like in the like low level activity of LLMs. We're like more interested about what kind of meaning or like sense making they're doing. and like on the different models, for example, because like were trained like independent way, but by different companies, but they look like they arrived to more or less like similar structure of meaning.
I have to go now,
Yeah,
so
alright.
thank you so much.
Yeah, and I may not see you again, potentially because I'll be leaving on May 31st.
And I'll be back.
You'll be back.
I'll just be gone the rest of this week, and I'll be back next week. So let's catch up before you leave.
Or, yeah.
Yeah, I'll try to convince you to think more of the sensor motor loop thing.
Okay.
Maybe we can actually merge sense motor contingency and integrated information theory.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you.
So these.
I'm still recording.
Yeah, that's also fine. And then in terms of the meaning structure, so what they actually so IIT's structure and the Korea structure is different in several ways. And one of the things that is different is that so far, most of the Korea structure is about sort of the intersubjective and also inter-experience kind of structure. Like, you experience something like red and then green and then blue and so on, and then, you try to kind of, measure the distance between this and the distance and this and this and this, right? Or over the time or over the space or something like that. And then,
They're all better, so.
it's usually the case. Maybe that's the reason why mathematicians prefer the one code.
Yes, no problems like that.
And then, but IIT's structure is intra experience structure. So, if you remember that this IJKL kind of detector, which is online, right? Detector, and then that corresponds to some kind of IJ kind of a concept that looks at the I and also into the J to the effect and cause and so on, something like that. Their idea is that for a given moment, you have this experience, and that is captured by this kind of intra-experiential structure. And then the Korea structure is not doing that at the moment. I mean, we want to do it. And so far, most of the time, what you tend to experience as similar as, like here and here, like color, right? Tend to be very similar when you show it once and then next. Usually it's the same. But there are some difference. So I think this intra-experiential structure is highly related to inter-experiential structure. And then when you talk about meaning structure, which one are you talking about? That's the first thing.
Yeah, maybe a little more like about quality structure.
Okay, so then, like, the meaning of the red and the meaning of the purple.
That depends on which other here.
Yeah, and then meaning of the angry, let's say red and angry is C, right? And angry and purple is no, and so on, right? Whether this is there in the LMM, I think LMM definitely has it.
Yeah, that's a good thing.
Right? But here, LMM is probably almost always zero.
Yeah, because it's like different very much.
Yeah. And out of nothing, you can actually construct something here.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean that, observing something like this can talk about this intra-experience, right? And, but, at the same time, I'm not saying that, analysis at this level is meaningless, because if LMM is something very similar to our human experience in terms of this inter-experiential structure, there must be something that it tells us, right? Like in the case of color, what we found was that the LMM is much similar to the human similarity structure, but much, much different from the standard color model, like an RGB and CIE lab, which means that probably our similarity experience is strongly influenced by the categorization, probably. But not the actual pixel level kind of, similarity. And in fact, if you measure this, it's pretty interesting. But, inside of this room, each of the pixel level, luminosity and so wavelengths is completely different from something that looks exactly the same outside. Because outside of sunlight has completely different kind of, wavelengths, structure. And we are normalizing it quite a bit in each of the environment. And you also have seen many color surrounding, illusion as well, right?
Did you saw the paper about impossible color? It's like the new one, they like activated the phones, the feeling of new color.
The Science Advanced paper?
Yeah.
I've heard of it, but I haven't read it. Yeah. So they
like artificially, so like because there's like overlap between the like the absorption bands of the like retina cells. There is like some combinations of the some combinations of activations which cannot be achieved naturally, so you never experienced them before. But they like artificially induce such stimulation, so you kind of feel the like impossible color.
Right.
Maybe you can share. Cool. I think it's a good spot to end this.
Yeah, and it's also consistent with what I thought, right?
Yeah,
because impossible from the causal structure in the world, but because the brain can be activated in that way, we can experience it. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
yeah.